So he does something that anticipates the existentialist, like Camus, Albert Camus, and Sartre. So Shakespeare, certainly a man ahead of his time. Okay? So this is one interesting way of understanding Shakespeare. I'll make one more argument about Shakespeare, and then we'll go into some more poetry. Another argument that I want to make about Shakespeare is I've been reading this book. You guys know Dostoevsky, right? Notes from Underground, Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, right? Don't worry, you'll all get to Dostoevsky at some point, right? In this book by Dostoevsky, he has the character whom he never names. He's just referred to as sort of the underground man. He makes the following statement, and I think this helps us understand the motive behind why Shakespeare writes these sonnets. And the underground man says the following to himself. He's imagining an audience that he's sort of writing to. But he says he'll never publish anything that he's writing. And then to himself he says, if not for the public, then why not simply recall everything mentally without transferring it to paper? In other words, he's asking himself, well, why do I write? And he gives the answer. He says, but on paper it will somehow come out more solemnly. There's something imposing in it. There will be more of a judgment on oneself. It will gain style. Besides, maybe I will indeed get relief from writing. I believe for some reason that if I write it down, I shall be rid of it. So what is it that Shakespeare is troubled by? He's troubled by the inevitability, the inescapability of the fact that he's getting old. What is his one way of dealing with this trauma, this pain, this hardship of getting old? To write. In other words, it's like, all right, so do we know who this guy is? Who's Freud? He's the father of psychoanalysis in the West, right? An Austrian Jew, right? And he sort of has this idea, right? He calls it the talking cure. In other words, if you talk about your problems, right, you can deal with them, right? Well, Dostoevsky is like, he's sort of like the writing cure, right? Writing about your problems is one way of dealing with it, right? And that's kind of what you can imagine Shakespeare is doing. He's got this problem, and he can't escape it. He's got to find some way to deal with it, right? So his way of dealing with it is what Dostoevsky just described, right? In writing about it, I can be rid of it. I can deal with it. Somehow I can make myself better. So just like Freud has his talking cure, Dostoevsky and Shakespeare before him have their writing cure. All right. So now let's get on to Sonnet 64. Okay. Now, I'll just ask you a question. What poetic device is used in that first line? When I have seen by time's fell hand defaced. Personification. All right, so describe the personification. How is it personification?
He said like the time has hand.
And what does time do with his hands?
Their hand defaced.
He defaces things, right? In other words, ruins them, right? Makes them worse, right? To paraphrase another famous poet, William Butler Yeats. I can't quote the line exactly because my memory is no longer as good as it used to be, but William Butler Yeats said that the beautiful and the innocent only have one enemy, time, right? So that's kind of what Shakespeare is describing in that first line, right? By personifying time, right? When I have seen by time's fell hand defaced. Now he's going to go on and give us a list of things that time defaces, right? So let's jump down to the next 4 lines that start with, when I have seen the hungry ocean gain advantage on the kingdom of the shore. What poetic device do we see Shakespeare using there? Okay, good. How is it personification?
Ocean can be hungry.
That's exactly right. He's making the ocean hungry, right? So he's giving a human characteristic to a non-human thing, right? That's very good. So see, now that you've seen those poetic devices used, you can discover them on your own, right? So you're doing the learning, right? Because believe it or not, I actually went to graduate school to learn this kind of stuff, and I paid a lot of money for it. But basically, teaching works this way, right? So you show the students what you want them to understand, right? That's the first step. That's what I did with the first poem. I showed you the poetic devices and the similes and the metaphors and the imagery and all that stuff, right? And the personification, right? Then we, at times, we do it together, right? And then, here's the big payoff. You're able to do it on your own, right? See, and that's how you know you've succeeded as a teacher when the students no longer need you, right? They can learn on their own. So you can already start to use what you've learned and apply it on your own. Right? And that's where you're empowered, right? That's where you're in control of your learning, right? You're not depending on me as a source of knowledge. That's good. All right, so now let's look at this line. Increasing store with loss and loss with store. Let's take a look at this line. Okay, so think about it this way. So this is A, this is B, this is B, this is A. So see how we changed the order of the words, right? Increasing store with loss and loss with store. All right, This is another rhetorical device. It's called a chiasmus. Now, I want you to return back to the Bukowski poem, The Tragedy of the Leaves. Now, see if you can find the chiasmus.
With jokes upon a sword, pain is absurd.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. With jokes upon absurd pain, right? So absurd would be A, pain would be B. Pain is absurd, right? So he inverts the word order. Chiasmus, right? See, again, Shakespeare, the poetic devices, the rhetorical devices, the imagery, the similes, the metaphors, all of these things that he uses sort of create the world of poetry that everyone else after him is working in. So if you see how they work in Shakespeare, it becomes much easier to recognize them in later poets, so you can better and more thoroughly understand these later poets, right? Just like this first line of this second sonnet, right? When I have seen by time's fell hand defaced, right? Time defaces all things, right? It's inevitable, it's inescapable. And then you come across this beautiful line by Yeats. Now, I'm not saying this is the exact line, this is a paraphrase, but the beautiful and the innocent have only one enemy, have only the enemy of time, right? That fits in with the Shakespearean theme, right? Okay, so I want to end now with just a brief, give me a second. I want to end on the essay. Which I don't think I'm going to find. Yeah, you see that. Thank you. All right, so in this essay I'm going to read to you, it's very brief, but I'm going to make an argument as to my approach to teaching Western culture and how I try to connect things together. So I start with a quote from Heraclitus, who is an early Greek thinker before Socrates, right? And he writes, an unapparent connection is stronger than an apparent one, right? In other words, a connection between two things that's easy to understand is not as strong or insightful or meaningful as one that isn't necessarily clear at the beginning, right? So an unapparent connection is stronger than an apparent one. Western culture is not just a book alone in isolation from other books as a soloing instrument on a stage, but rather Western culture is how the books stand together from one century or decade to the next as an orchestra, and expressed ideas which are the foundation of a way of thinking, writing, and living. Students might be surprised to discover that when they are reading the Iliad, they are preparing themselves to understand the war culture that animates the world of Shakespeare's Macbeth. While reading the Iliad, students learn about the ancient Greeks. Thus we hear the Greek soldier Diomedes scold Odysseus, "Where are you fleeing to, with your back turned like a coward? See that you are not struck with a spear between the shoulders." We learn from the Iliad that good soldiers stand and fight, and encourage others to do so as well. With this background knowledge, it is therefore understandable when in Shakespeare's Macbeth, we hear the father Seward ask about a son who had died fighting Macbeth. Had he his hurts before? That is to say, did he die fleeing like a coward, or was he stabbed as he faced his enemy, like a good soldier? Yet the connections between Shakespeare's Macbeth and the ancient world do not stop with the Iliad. Macbeth's ambition for power comes at the cost comes at a cost that perhaps in his haste to achieve the throne, he does not anticipate. He confides to his wife, Lady Macbeth, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife." Blinded by ambition for power, Macbeth took from his King Duncan his throne by murder. And only too late, Macbeth learns that power is accompanied by problems that unceasingly plague the mind, like the stings of scorpions. Yet what Macbeth had overlooked, the ancient Greek playwright Sophocles had understood in Oedipus the King. In defense against the accusation by the king Oedipus that his brother-in-law Creon is trying to steal the throne, Creon himself responds, "Who in his right mind would rather rule and live in anxiety than sleep in peace?" Creon explains to Oedipus that he enjoys the benefits of power because he is the brother-in-law of the king and enjoys royal power without any of the anxieties that make for sleepless nights. The very anxieties that even haunt Macbeth's dreams, terrible dreams that shake us nightly. These anxieties are so horrible that Macbeth prefers the peace of death to the life he has as king. He says to Queen Macbeth, "Better be with the dead, whom we, to gain our peace, have sent to peace." A little less wise than his royal predecessor Creon, Macbeth never realizes before killing King Duncan that perhaps peace of mind itself is more important than power, and that ambition isn't without suffering and power without loss. Loss and suffering, however inevitable and even self-inflicted, aren't, at least, without the dreadful compensation of knowledge for Macbeth. At the death of Queen Macbeth, King Macbeth himself does not mourn her loss, but rather concludes, "Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more." This image of the fleeting nature of human life, the shadow, is not unique to Shakespeare. Before him, the Greek playwright Euripides, in the Medea, has a character state, "Our human life, I think and have thought, a shadow. And I do not fear to say that those who are held wise among men and who search the reasons of things are those who bring the most sorrow on themselves." So here too are connections between two works separated by centuries. The transient nature of life and the image of the shadow is expressed in both. But a deeper insight unites the works. At the end of Shakespeare's play, King Macbeth expresses ideas about human life, its transience, and perhaps meaninglessness that would have been foreign to and impossible for the mere warrior Macbeth at the beginning of the play to make. Macbeth, in his transition from warrior to king, has brought sorrows on himself. And those sorrows are the origin of his powerful understanding about human life. Undoubtedly, Euripides shared Shakespeare's belief in a relationship between sorrow and knowledge. Seemingly, one cannot exist in the absence of the other. I believe these connections and comparisons, the foundation of Western culture, only occur to the student who lives by Ralph Waldo Emerson's description of the growing intellect. In his essay, The American Scholar, he describes the student who finds how to join two things and see in them one nature, then three, then 3,000, and so tyrannized over by its own unifying instinct, goes on tying things together, discovering roots running underground, whereby contrary and remote things cohere and flower out from one stem. To develop such an intellect is an ambitious goal, and that is all the reason more why we should attempt it. So just as I tried to show you how you can use Shakespeare to understand other poems and other poets, I also showed you how some of the ideas in Shakespeare anticipate existentialism, and they also sort of express ideas that are similar to what Dostoevsky and Sigmund Freud discuss. All right. So do you have any questions? course not. You're like, I'm hungry, I want to go. All right, well, I'm glad that you showed up. I hope you enjoyed it, and look forward. Yes? Yes?
Are you going to start by introducing Shakespeare's books from the very beginning of the class, or it's going to be gradually?
Well, if the Western culture class, the way it works, for example, is, I can go over this.
Yeah, so it's kind of deep for
Mhm.
a lot of students.
Right, so what I do is I start with Animal Farm, right, by George Orwell. And I do an interpretation of Animal Farm based upon, Marx, Karl Marx's critique of capitalism, because that's what happens in the Animal Farm. And Orwell is sort of critiquing Marx's critique, right? And then we see the same sort of themes played out in another book called Fahrenheit 451, right? Both of these books are about egalitarianism in a way. This is one of the themes that sort of ties them together, right? Then we get to To Kill a Mockingbird. By Harper Lee. But one of the things that you come to realize in the book To Kill a Mockingbird is that on one level it's about racism, right? But on another level, she's criticizing public education. And public education, the way that she understands it, is sort of created to, it's a factory to create people like Boxer from the Animal Farm, who's sort of stupid and doesn't think for himself, right? Because that's the kind of people that egalitarian systems want. They want everyone to sort of be the same, be mediocre, don't ask questions, just do as you're told. Well, Harper Lee's critique of public education is that's what public education does, right? Instead of raising people up, it makes everyone mediocre. Right? So I tie those books together in similarity of theme. Then I go on to more complicated books. Right? So then at this point we go on to The Stranger. That's right. So when I go to The Stranger, then the way I break it down is I use a medical analogy. Right? So a medical analogy has three parts: diagnosis, right? Therapy, and then a state of health, right? Same thing happens in Animal Farm, right? Because the diagnosis is that the bourgeoisie, the capitalist culture, exploits the worker, right? The owner gets all the benefit, and when the worker can no longer work, the worker is gotten rid of. That's the diagnosis. What's the Marxist therapy? Violent revolution, right? The bourgeoisie, the owner, is not going to give up his power, right? He likes being in control and owning all the stuff. So, how do you get the stuff? You take the stuff. Violent revolution, right? And then what's the state of health that follows? Everyone is the same. Egalitarianism, right? So the medical analogy becomes a very useful tool for interpreting works, right?
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Silence means no. No questions, right? Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
Thank you.